Thank you for having me here. One of the best things about working on the issue of gun violence has been getting to know a bunch of faith leaders that I didn't know before. Extraordinary people like our host, Dan Wiener, and Paul Benz, and Sandy Brown, who I think is here somewhere, Father Mike Ryan, and many others. It's been a great privilege to get to know a bunch of people that I didn't know before, who are extraordinary community leaders who have been at the forefront of this fight for a long time, well, certainly longer than I have been. And I want to thank you personally for your courage and your leadership. If the only thing that stopped a bad guy with a gun was a good guy with a gun, given how many so-called good guys with guns we have in this country, we would be a very safe country, but indeed we're not. And I know you know that we're not. Your chance of being murdered in the USA with a gun is someplace between 8 and 200 times higher than in other industrialized countries. And I think basically the only thing you need to know about gun violence is that there is a near perfect statistical correlation between the number of guns in the community and the number of gun deaths in that community. I will admit that I never gave really 2 minutes of thought to gun violence before the tragedy at Sandy Hook approximately a year ago. But that event really pushed me over the edge. I have 2 small children of my own, and that event was definitely a crystallizing event for me. But I should also add that in that year leading up to Sandy Hook, I had 2 tragedies or near tragedies in my own life. I mean, there were tragedies that just didn't happen to us, but very closely. A software developer who worked a floor above me and worked for my best friend, named Justin Ferrari, who was shot and killed in front of his family while driving home at the corner of 23rd and Cherry. His children weren't friends of mine, but they were known to mine, and so we had to have a very difficult conversation with them. And then just a week later, the mother of one of my son's schoolmates was executed by the Cafe Racer murder as she walked to her car just a few blocks from here on Capitol Hill. Again, a very, very difficult conversation to have with your children. And after Sandy Hook, we knew that we needed to organize a new coalition of citizens and leaders around the issue of gun violence if we were going to ever beat back the relentless efforts of the gun lobby to sell more guns and create more violence. So our goal, we have an organization called the Washington Alliance for Gun Responsibility, and our goal is to pass tough and fair law to criminal background checks called Initiative 594, and we're out gathering signatures right now, and we'll submit those signatures at the very beginning of January. And then that initiative, that law, will go to the legislature, and they will consider it in an up or down vote. They will almost certainly embarrass themselves and us and do nothing. And the law will go to the voters in November, and we will almost certainly win. I should mention that with fans' help, we've gotten over 200 faith leaders and congregations to endorse that initiative, and fans have been incredible. But to be successful, we need your help. We need volunteers, we need organizers, we need people to throw events, and we need your financial support. Because we should all be clear that the issue of gun violence isn't so much a legal problem, but a moral and cultural problem. And it won't be laws that solve this problem, it'll be a change in culture. So we don't need just to change the laws, we need to build a movement that changes the culture around violence in our society. And that's where you can come in. The faith community has known about this for a long time. You've been working on it for a long time. This has been obvious to you for a long time, but it has not been as obvious to some of us. And so the important questions I think we need to be asking are moral and cultural questions, not legal ones. It's important that we ask why so many people in our society feel the need to be armed, feel the need to be violent. Why are so many people in our society compelled to carry a weapon with them wherever they go? Feel compelled to fill their homes with military-grade weapons? What are they afraid of? How did it get this way? I think this is ultimately the question we need to answer, the problem that we need to address. And I believe the core of this is kind of moral and economic isolation and dislocation and alienation in the country. We live in a society almost completely ruled by the market, where our principal definition of whether something is good or not is whether it makes money. And from this rule of the market, as Pope Francis recently so ably pointed out, it doesn't make news when a poor person dies, but when the stock market goes down 2 points, this we report on. Let me stop for a moment, and at the risk of engaging competitive dynamics here, give a shout out to the new Pope. I'm Jewish, but the new Pope rocks. And you know, the main part of my civic work is on economic inequality and so on and so forth. I do a lot of writing and speaking about it. And I must say that, you know, I'm embarrassed myself by not remembering the word they used to describe the thing he just did. It wasn't a speech and it wasn't a document. There's some technical, yes, whatever that word is. I can't remember that word, but I must say I could have written that myself. And Danny, I must tell you, wherever you are, I was moved. When I read it, I mean, if the man had used the phrase middle-out economics, I would have been moved to convert, I must say. But I digress. I mean, we have ended up with a culture that celebrates the accumulation of enormous amounts of wealth, no matter how it's gotten. But we ignore the critical issues that define the quality of life of most of our citizens. And my belief that a big part of the gun violence problem is really an economic insecurity and poverty problem. An economy that makes lots and lots of people poor and is in the process of making everyone in the middle class poor too is a recipe for anger, alienation, mistrust, and violence. And no issue is more relevant to all of this than the issue of increasing and radical economic inequality. I won't go through the stats. I presume most of you are somewhat familiar with it, but I just want to share one thing with you, one stat that I think is very important and often overlooked, and that is that 30 years ago when Ronald Reagan took office, the top 1% of Americans shared about 8% of national income, and the bottom 50% of Americans shared about 18%. 30 years later, in 2010, about now, the top 1% now shares 24% of national income, so it's tripled. And the bottom 50% of Americans share about 12%, so it's gone down by about a third. That's not the stat I want to share with you. The stat I want to share with you is the trend. So if you simply assume that things will keep going as they are, otherwise known as a linear extrapolation, by 2030, the top 1% will share 37% of national income. And the bottom 50% of Americans will share just 6% of national income. So if you think we have a gun violence today, just wait 30 years. My view is that economic insecurity is a significant driver of the culture of guns, violence that we see around us. And if we don't find a way to include more people in the success of our economy, they will find a way to show their frustration and anger with that. And guns and violence will be one of the principal ways that they will demonstrate that dissatisfaction. So how do we get here? What do we do to fix it? So there are many causes of our current economic quagmire. And it is easy, and in fact I think too easy, to say that evil people caused it. I think there's a more charitable way, and frankly a more constructive way, to think about the cause and the cure. And it's by seeing it as misunderstanding. And to demonstrate that misunderstanding, I want to read you a recent quote by the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, who, when responding to President Obama's call to raise the minimum wage, said, and I quote, "When you raise the price of employment, guess what happens? You get less of it. When you raise the price of employment, guess what happens? You get less of it." In other words, if wages go up, employment must go down. Here's the thing, here's the problem. When he said that, most Americans nodded. Many of you may be nodding. That's because John Boehner invoked an explanation for how the economy worked that is well accepted on the right and left. In fact, it's what they used to teach in economics courses in college. It's what drives most of our policy. And this trickle-down set of ideas holds that rich business people like myself are the job creators in a capitalist economy, and the richer we get, the more money we have, the more jobs we create. And heaven forbid, if we had less money, we create less jobs, and that would be bad for the economy and for prosperity. But it also holds, by extension, by implication, Speaker Boehner said it clearly there, that if the poor get richer, that will be bad for the economy. That is what he said. And by extension, if the poor get poorer, that has to be good for the economy. That is what he said. This is crazy. This is insane. Please, for a moment, put aside your moral outrage. You do not need it. Economic outrage is what you should be feeling. Because this is not morally wrong. It is morally wrong. But that's not the point. It's just economically not true. How can it be that if workers make less money, that will be good for business? Who will buy the stuff? Who will buy the stuff? It's crazy. Where will the demand that drives the economy come from if workers are more and more impoverished? It can't be true. And in fact, there's no evidence for this any place on earth. Saying that if wages go up, unemployment will necessarily go down is like saying that if plants grow, animals will shrink. This is not true. Animals eat plants. The more plants there are, the more animals there are, and so on. Likewise, businesses, figuratively, eat the demand from workers' wages. The more wages there are, the more business you can do. If it was true that high wages were bad for business, then the places on earth with the lowest wages would be where the most robust business activity was. That Apple and Amazon and Microsoft would be in the Congo or Kazakhstan. They're clearly not. No, they started here. By the way, in high-wage places. Because high wages are the thing that animate the virtuous cycle of demand and growth that is an economy. This is why Speaker Boehner's notions about how capitalism works are wrong. He thinks the fundamental law of capitalism is when wages go up, employment goes down. He has it backwards. The fundamental law of capitalism is that if workers don't have any money, businesses don't have any customers. More business means more hiring, which means more business, which means more hiring. So if you want growth, you have to find ways to make sure that businesses pay workers adequately, because when they do, they make very good customers. So to be clear, I don't think Speaker Boehner is evil. I think he's a moron. I do believe that thinking he's stupid is better than thinking he's evil. Speaker in this very simplistic way, sort of like a bowl of popcorn. When we eat some, we'll have less of it. But economies are not simple like that. Economies are open, complex, adaptive, and ecosystemic. And prosperity is a consequence of the feedback loop between customers and businesses. The true job creators in the capitalist economy are middle-class consumers. This is why a policy focus on the middle class is and has always been the best way to animate growth. Policies like dramatically increasing the minimum wage aren't just morally just, they're economically smart. They animate growth. This is why tax cuts for the rich haven't worked. They don't animate growth. The only thing they do is make the rich richer, which has gone very well over the last 30 years. Prosperity does not trickle down from the top. It's built from the middle out. Speaker Boehner thinks, and many people in this country think, that a thriving middle class is the consequence of growth. It's something you get from prosperity and growth. Again, they have it backwards. A thriving middle class is the source of growth and prosperity in capitalist economies. So here's the problem. Speaker Boehner can stand in front of a large group of people and he can say that, and people nod. No one shouts him down. And the fact that he doesn't get thousands of emails from people saying, "You've lost your mind. It's just not the way it works." That's the problem. That's the problem. If you want to fix that, you in the audience and others must become the chorus of citizens who do that, who shout these people down, who point out that this simply can't be true. It's not so. I hope you'll be willing to do that. If you're willing to do that, I want you to repeat after me right now. Repeat after me. If workers have no money,
Workers have no money.
businesses have no customers.
Businesses have no customers.
There you go. We just made progress tonight. I believe that the issue of gun violence and the issue of poverty and inequality are deeply linked. An exclusionary and vastly unequal economy won't just produce less overall growth and prosperity, it will also absolutely produce insecurity, anger, mistrust, and violence. Tonight, you were going to honor some folks who helped us win a $15 minimum wage in CTAC. I could not be prouder to be here on a night celebrating that. They are true heroes, but I would urge you to consider that the fight over the minimum wage isn't just an economic fight, it's also a fight for finding ways to include everyone in our economy, including all people in the success of our economy, is the single biggest thing we can do to make our country work better and our communities stronger. Solving this economic challenge will also help us solve the moral challenge of gun violence. And by so doing, make our communities safer, more prosperous, and more moral all at the same time. Thank you for having me tonight.